Hello, and welcome to the Halloween edition of the Washington Courts Report, the official podcast of the Administrative Office of the Courts, where I cover some of the most exciting news and programs from the AOC and around the Washington court system as a whole. I'm your host, Patrick Harley, and today we're going to be discussing Pierce County's new Juror Pay Pilot Project, which began earlier this month. So as part of this pilot program, which began on October 14th and is set to run through May 2025, jurors who appear for jury duty at the County City Building, which includes Pierce County District Court, Superior Court, and Tacoma Municipal Court, will receive $100 per day plus mileage reimbursement instead of the typical $10 per day paid to jurors in Pierce County and throughout the majority of Washington. The pilot program will measure whether higher juror pay reduces barriers to jury participation and, in turn, improves jury diversity. The Administrative Office of the Courts has partnered with Pierce County to distribute surveys to participating jurors throughout the pilot to measure impact and the sentiment of increased pay. In addition, the surveys will also measure demographic changes over the course of the pilot to see if diversity is indeed improving. Once the pilot concludes at the end of May, work will immediately begin to compile findings into a report, which will be presented to the legislator along with potential recommendations for future juror projects or adjustments to juror pay. The legislature appropriated nearly $1.6 million to Pierce County for this 7-month pilot, paying $90 of the $100 daily rate for jurors, while Pierce County continues to pay the remaining $10. So, to learn more about this great project, I'm excited to speak with Pierce County Superior Court Administrator Chris Gaddis and learn more about some of the details from his side of things. Then afterwards, I'm also excited to speak with Laurie Louise Sale from the Administrative Office of the Courts, who is helping administer the pay pilot as the project manager. So, without further ado, let's dive right into what's sure to be some great conversations. And to tell us more about the pilot program, I'd like to welcome Pierce County Superior Court Administrator Chris Gaddis to the show. Welcome to the show, Chris, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure, Patrick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so Chris, just to get started, jurors are going to be paid $100 per day once they attend Pierce County courts. What courts does that include, and are they getting the $100 for every day they appear at the courthouse?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Patrick. For this pay pilot in particular, the state legislature has assigned it to Pierce County Superior Court. Pierce County Superior Court manages Pierce County Superior Court, Pierce County District Court, and Tacoma Municipal Court. So any trial courts that are here in the County City Building in downtown Tacoma, those jurors are managed by Superior Court Jury Administration. So any jurisdiction in Pierce County that's not down here at the County City Building, so Lakewood or Fife or Puyallup, those court systems are not included in the pay pilot. Now, your question about who gets the $100, so everybody on day one, there's not a difference between somebody who comes in on a Monday, doesn't get assigned a panel and is released versus those who are assigned a panel and then are actually seated on a jury. Everybody gets the same rate of $100.
That's fantastic, and it really, helps the two ends of the spectrum. If you're just going in for those couple hours in the mornings, that $100 feels like a big deal. But if, you're in one of those longer juries for 5+ days, those missed days of work stack up more and more, right? So that $100 becomes, an even bigger deal. And so as the Pierce County Superior Court Administrator, how would you describe your role within the pilot program?
So as the court administrator, I don't have a lot of hands-on with our jurors on a day-to-day basis. It is my staff who send out the request to our Pierce County General Services, who send out the 2,500 summons a week. It's my jury admin staff who manage all the people as they come in, check them in, put them through orientation, get them up to the courtrooms. So my role is more of community outreach, doing interviews like this. Had an interview this morning as well. So it's communicating with the public. It's talking with our county council members about the pay pilot. It's once the pay pilot is finished, it's going to be talking to legislators about what the process looked like. How was it successful? What would future pay pilots look like, or what would be the impact if this were uh, a full time, not no longer a pilot, but actual increased jury pay. So my end is on the more the administrative promotional side of the pay pilot.
Okay, that definitely makes sense. Gotta get the word out there so people can opt in for jury service and get their $100, hopefully. So one thing you mentioned is the legislator selecting Pierce County for this. Why do you think Pierce County was the optimal choice for this pilot program versus something maybe a little bigger like King or something a little more rural in Eastern Washington, for example?
Sure, I think Pierce, we have been involved at least the 8 years that I've been here as the court administrator. We've been heavily involved in looking at our jury system and trying to determine if we, the court, are placing any barriers on service to the public. We've looked at our response rates. Where are our jurors coming from? Where are they not coming from? We've been an early adopter of the multiple surveys that have been conducted over the last 8 years as well. Seattle University has conducted, I think, 4 different surveys in which we've all been a part of. Now that survey is now in the hands of the Administrative Office of the Courts. Dr. Shurko is handling that. So I think our early adoption of being a participant in those surveys was a big help. We also have a very robust jury management system that actually allows us to show how our jurors move through the system when they are communicating with the court before ever coming in our doors, once they get inside our doors, and then how they're dispersed to different courtrooms, and then whether or not they're actually seated or an alternate on a panel. So all of that history and the fact that we are the second largest court and a very diverse population, I think gave us the opportunity to show what an additional $90 or $100 a day could do for diversity in our justice system. And it's not just race or ethnicity, it's socioeconomic, it's education. There's a lot of layers that go with that diversity.
Okay, yeah, that definitely checks out. Need to have, that diversity to be able to measure if it's changing, and also the size and tracking abilities, makes a huge deal for seeing if the pilot program's successful. The whole point of this.
We have been surveying our jurors for the last little over 2.5 years, I believe. And Washington State has one of the largest jury surveys in the history of the United States. I think we have over 1 million surveys completed by Washington jurors. And because we have that history of those surveys, we are able to compare, now that the jury pay pilot has started, we're able to compare the new numbers with our old numbers and see if that data has changed any. And the legislators are going to be reviewing that with the final report from the Administrative Office of the Courts.
Yeah, no, the extra survey results I know have been such a big deal for working towards jury diversity. That survey partnership between Seattle University and the Minority and Justice Commission before it transferred to the AOC I know was really important for getting this to happen. And we'll make sure, for those listening, to link that in the description or on our webpage for this show. And Chris, one thing I want to hear from you, you've really been doing the outreach, as you said. What have the first responses and feedback been like for the jury pay pilot? Because as of now, it's launched for about a week at the time of this recording.
Yeah, October 14th is when we started. But I remember going for the jurors the week of the 7th, so October 7th, a week before. It was kind of actually interesting or exciting that I got to tell our jurors who were in the building getting paid $10 a day, that, hey, you're going to get a pay raise next week. And that was a big deal because $10, that hasn't changed since the late 50s. And $10 doesn't go very far in downtown Tacoma. So the idea that I was able to tell them that they're getting a big pay raise, that played really well in the audience. So that was really exciting. The day one, so October 14th, our presiding judge, Tim Ashcraft, got to go down and welcome our jurors that day and let them know that they are the first group as the pay pilot. And so there was a lot of, I think, appreciation in the room that they are finally getting some real compensation. So that was nice to see. I don't know that it's necessarily funny, but one of the things that our jury supervisor has noticed is that a lot of people are bringing in their juror summons that mentions the $100 a day. It says, "Congratulations, you're part of our jury pay pilot," and people are actually bringing that in a much higher rate than they ever have before. They've never brought it in. They only bring in what we call the red and white summons, but people are bringing in both just to make sure that they are part of the pay pilot program.
Got to make sure you're getting your money, right? So, one thing you sort of touched on there, with jurors being paid more, the benefit's obvious, right? You mentioned it was the $10 was originally set back in the 50s. And I know the Tacoma News Tribune wrote a really good article on the pay pilot where they mentioned a gallon of gas back then costed 25 cents and a house a little more than 12 grand. So definitely a much different environment than when that pay was initially set. So we know the benefit to jurors, but how does the increased juror pay, and in turn hopefully increased diversity in a number of ways, benefit cases and the justice system as a whole, would you say?
So like I mentioned earlier in a response, we want to make sure that we don't have any barriers, artificial barriers to a juror serving in our justice system. So you can imagine how low pay, if they're not getting reimbursed by their employer, if they're self-employed, things like that, low pay can make an incredible difference. It doesn't necessarily matter your ethnicity, your diversity, if your socioeconomic status. If you can't afford to be there, you simply can't afford to be there. And so if we can reduce barriers and provide opportunities for people that may be lower socioeconomic or self-employed, the opportunity to sit on a jury panel. The Seattle University studies have shown that should or has the potential for increasing the race and ethnicity diversity of our jury pools. We want to make sure as much as we can that there is a representative pool to impanel from. And so if there are right out of the chute, there's barriers to demographics not being able to come in, we want to reduce those. And so this is a huge step towards that, so that we can get as diverse a group in as possible. One of the things that the Seattle University study showed for us was that women at the initial stage of coming in our door and sitting through orientation were overrepresented. But as they moved through the system and were seated on a panel or a jury, that they were actually underrepresented. And a lot of that, based on some barrier questions that Seattle University had asked, we're surmising that it's because of things like childcare, things like elder care, areas where the $10 a day just wasn't enough. So we're hoping that we will see a change in that and maybe get to a little bit parity between men and women in Pierce County.
Yeah, that would be great. Reducing those barriers is so important for guaranteeing a jury of our peers, which is one of every person's rights. So I want to hear from your perspective. I imagine, different people would answer this differently, whether it's a legislator, you, or maybe someone from the Minority and Justice Commission. But what would a successful pay pilot program look like to you? Because this is running from October through May of 2025. I'll let you correct me if I got that wrong. So what would, in end of May, June, what would you like to see for a successful pilot program?
I think the first thing that I recognize as a court administrator, again, like you said, I'm not a judge. I don't play one on TV. I'm not a legislator. I just simply looking at this from a court administrative perspective. The fact that for the next 7 or so months, we are going to be able to pay our jurors a more respectable wage is is huge. That's a big win. I know it doesn't necessarily talk to the diversity, you know, in and of itself, but being able to recognize that the work that our jurors who come in our doors put into being a jury, the time away from home, the time away from work, time away from family, um, the restriction on not telling their family what they're involved in. It's a lot. It impacts it's trauma, it's stress. It is a lot of work, and being able to finally compensate them truly for what they're working, how they're working in the justice system, that is a huge win for me just from the start. Just that the legislators have realized that this is an issue, that's a win for us. So the next 7 months are going to be great just in paying people more. I think because of the survey responses that we have, the historical information, and now the jury pay pilot, if we are able to demonstrate that by paying people more, we have more diversity in our jury pool. And again, that's socioeconomic, it's um, education, it's race and ethnicity based. There's so many factors about diversity. If we can demonstrate that paying $100 a day more or $100 a day total increases the diversity of our jury pools, that is an absolute win as well. And so the benefit, I think, we have to be able to tell the legislatures what works and what doesn't. And if we can have the first pay pilot that actually demonstrates there is a correlation between increased pay and the diversity of your jury pool, that's a win. If the legislators would take that information and either create additional pay pilots or decide to assist with funding or fully fund this, that's for me, that's the baby steps. When I started this 8 years ago, you understand that what increased pay would do to your jury pools. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that out. But baby steps, right? And our jury diversity work group that we've had going for I think the last 4 years, maybe even 5 years, we meet once a week for 5 years. That's a pretty dedicated group.
Yeah.
And we have really looked at this as a baby step type situation where if we get these small wins, they are going to end up being the big win, which is potentially paying all jurors in Washington state that realistic wage.
Yeah, and you make such a great point there. When you have something like juror pay that's stayed the same for so long and is kind of entrenched, those first steps are really so important to try and get the momentum going. And one thing you mentioned there that I think made a good point is it's really going to be like sort of delivering the results and the report to the legislator after the fact, with the Minority and Justice Commission helping with that. And one thing they might do is they might take a look at the results and opt for more pay pilots after the fact. If you were to maybe give some advice or early lessons that you've learned from the pay pilot to another courts administrator who's looking at a pay pilot of their own or just increasing juror pay, what would you tell them?
It's not easy trying to figure out all the layers that are going to be impacted. We just had one that came up today, and I've received a bunch of emails this morning from judges and judicial assistants that have brought to our attention that our work slips are not accurate. They are still accounting for the $10 per day because that's a baked into the system response, right? Our Links computer system says, "Oh, you want a pay slip for your work? Here you go. It's easy. It's always been $10 a day." Well, Now it's obviously $100 a day, but for those people who need to account for their work or their jury service 3 weeks ago, it was still $10 a day. So those types of issues that can come up, just, you know, you don't know what you don't know. And so really walking through the process and and getting people on board is really critical. We had a group of judges who um, we had an internal review group that was kind of looking at all of the work product that administrative office of the courts was creating for our community outreach, just to make sure from a court perspective, from a judge perspective, that everything was clear, concise, um, didn't promise any, not anything above what we, are trying to accomplish here. Um, yeah, you just don't know what you don't know, and so really walking through the steps as much as you possibly can. You're always going to forget something. It's just the nature of the beast. We've all got busy jobs, but really walking through it from a juror's perspective is probably the best advice I can give.
All right, absolutely. That makes sense. Something's always going to slip through, but looking for the cracks ahead of time and making them as small as possible seems essential. Well, Chris, I want to thank you so much. You've given us a lot of insight on this pay pilot, and I feel like I know a lot more about it. Are there any last thoughts or messages about the pay pilot you'd like to leave off on?
Just thanking the Washington State Legislature for providing this money. I think it's going to go a long ways towards understanding diversity and the impact that additional funding would have on our jury systems. I want to thank all the jurisdictions in Washington that have participated in the electronic survey process that we've been doing over the last few years. It's additional work. You always hear the unfunded mandate type discussion, but it's so critically important to understanding this issue. And again, those baby steps that help us get there. You can't say enough about the work that our jurisdictions are doing to keep our justice system moving forward.
Yeah, it really takes so many different people working towards this to get a project like this done. Well, Chris, again, thanks so much for coming on the show, and good luck with the rest of this pay pilot. I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thanks, Patrick.
And to tell us a little bit more about the pilot program from the AOC side of things, I'm joined today by Laurie Louise Sale, a court program analyst with the Administrative Office of the Courts. Thanks for joining us today, Laurie Louise.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me and this opportunity to talk a little bit more about the Pierce County Juror Pay Pilot Program.
Of course, I'm excited to hear more about it from you. So, one thing I wanted to start off with is you are actually administering the pilot program as the project manager for AOC. Could you tell us a little bit about what that role entails?
Sure. I was actually very excited to be appointed to this role. In addition to this position, I also am spearheading and leading another jury diversity initiative, the Child Care Assistance Program. But for all intents and purposes, I was put into this position to become the project manager so I would have the opportunity to lead and kind of coordinate between the AOC staff and external stakeholders on the Dre Pay pilot to kind of ensure everybody keeps informed and keep that train moving down the track. There was not a project manager before, so once I believe we were getting about a few months outside of the actual initial pay pilot. Um, I think there was a need to have somebody come in and kind of manage everything and keep us all on track as we got closer to the initial launch date of October 14th. So, in addition to just kind of keeping everybody informed, I also serve as the point of contact for the Pierce County Superior Court, as far as liaisoning with them. I also serve as point of contact for media and any other communications that are related to the Juror Pay pilot. I also am the contract manager for the reimbursements between AOC and Pierce County. And I will also have the privilege of drafting any communications regarding the status and the findings of the pilot project to the legislature, probably in coordination with Dr. Chirico.
So they're really keeping you busy, wearing a lot of different hats for the project, it seems like.
Yeah, and also speaking to I've done a couple presentations, one at the Judicial Conference in September, which was wonderful. Had a chance to spread the news about this great initiative to the folks there, the Supreme Court justices, the Majority Justice Commission as well. That's where this all started. And also had a chance to update the BJA as well, just this past week or so.
Well, that's awesome. And everything I've seen, you've been doing an amazing job with that. So, one thing with you wearing all those hats and sort of having all this different experience in the project, I'd be really interested in hearing from you about this on why is it so important that we improve jury diversity in our state? Because we know we've had the survey where jury diversity is lacking and there are barriers to it. But I'm interested from your perspective, what would be the benefits to the state and to the justice system if we did manage to improve jury diversity through initiatives like this?
Yeah, such a great question. And from my perspective, it's always because diversity adds that extra layer of not only importance, but experiences. And when you have a jury pool that is looking at a case with a lens of different backgrounds, um, what everybody's bringing to the table, whether it's gender related, racial makeup, LGBTQ, when we talk about barriers, that applies to all of those things, including, language access, all of those things. But, particularly here in this case, we're looking at the diversity for our juries. And whenever you have a jury that can look at the case from an eye with the perspective of just more variety, that just lends itself to a more equitable outcome for a case. And I think it's important that, our state has is shown itself to be a leader in jury diversity initiatives, not only with this, but also the Child Care Assistance Program, and just the studies in general, whether they came from the GJC, or the study done in conjunction with Seattle University. It's really important that we follow through on those, and that our juries start to really reflect what our population is as well.
Yeah, of course. The reflection and jury of our peers is so important, and anytime you have a chance of even improving outcomes, you have to pursue it. So those two sort of cross points seem like they make it absolutely essential. So one thing I kind of want to get your ideas on is we know improved jury diversity is a major goal. And we heard from Chris on this a little bit, but from the more AOC perspective and your side of things, what would you view as a successful pilot program if we fast forward to May or June when it ends? What would you like to have seen?
Well, I think the number one thing I would like to see is just, an increase in folks wanting to say yes to the jury summons, not
Yeah.
wanting to bypass it or offer whatever reason it may be to get excused from jury service, whether it's, gosh, I hope not financial, that's what we're trying to stem, or childcare, whatever barrier it may be that folks say, gosh, I just don't want to do that. I don't have time. Whatever reason they use to get excused from jury service. That's my number one hope, is that potential jurors want to participate, and they get a summons card in the mail and they say, yes, I'm going to make time to do this. I'm going to make time to perform this all important civic duty, as a juror. So for me, that standpoint, AOC, I think that would be a successful pilot program, really increasing the juror pool in general. And I know I've talked about that before, but I think that would be a real indicator of success, that when we're looking at comparing response rates, that the response rates that we see now this year, maybe compared to last year, have really elevated. And then, this may be obvious, Patrick, but I think a successful pilot program would be the acceptance of the legislature that it was successful, and that we are able to put together another decision package, or, appeal for more funding to either A, increase more pilots within the state, or B, even better, go for the statewide pilot to just say, yes, we're going to go ahead and do this across the state. So I imagine just the increase in jury pool in general, funding for either additional pilots or statewide pilot, to me would be three massive signs of this pilot was a true success.
I think you really touched on a couple great points there. Where first off, while jury diversity is sort of the name of the game here, really like reducing the barriers and increasing the juror pool, which is a more general idea, really helps the idea of jury diversity, I think is so important. And the second one is that while all those are massively important, what really started this off was the legislator funding this pilot program, appropriating around $1.6 million to Pierce County. The hope is, at least the plan was, to evaluate the pilot program from there and keep moving on. So, with that, you've been really helpful with shining some light on this. I think this has been a really productive conversation. Are there any thoughts or last messages, either on jury diversity or just the pay pilot, you'd like to leave us off with?
Patric, I think that I've said as much as I can say about it, but I will just end with, always a positive note is that it's just a real privilege to be in a position to where you can, literally see the help you're giving to the citizens of the state and making a difference. And I think that AOC, is having a huge impact on that, just with the pay pilot alone and really kind of setting some serious goals and maybe how things will move forward in the future. So it's just a real privilege to be a part of that. And, we sit in service to our state when we do these jobs. So that will probably be my last thing I have to say about it. Just grateful for the opportunity.
That's so great. And once again, thank you for coming on. It's been an absolute privilege. I've been following the jury diversity work since the survey was released, so it's been awesome following your guys' work and the progression finally to the pay pilot and hopefully what's soon to come. Well, Laurie Louise, have a great day. And once again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Patrick.
And that wraps up today's episode. Once again, a big thanks to Chris and Laurie Louise for coming on the show and shedding some light on this important initiative. If you're interested in learning more about the pay pilot or jury diversity, you can go to courts.wa.gov and find our podcast under the Features section on the homepage. There, under today's episode, you can find relevant links related to the pay pilot and jury diversity, including the survey we mentioned from Seattle University or a press release on the launch of the pay pilot. These links will also be included on the description of the YouTube video. So, on behalf of Washington's Administrative Office of the Courts, thank you for listening to this episode of the Washington Courts Report podcast. If you're interested in hearing more, you can subscribe to Washington Courts on YouTube or Washington Courts Report on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, where new episodes will be releasing monthly. New episodes will also be posted on the Washington Courts Facebook and LinkedIn pages upon release. Once again, thanks for listening and have a happy Halloween.